Up next via Skype is Carrie Lukas. She's president of Independent Women's Forum. Welcome, Carrie.
Welcome,
Having me
welcome.
on.
So, Carrie, you recently wrote an op-ed questioning the legitimacy of gender studies classes in colleges and university. Why do you think that we should reevaluate what is taught in these classes?
Well, I do think it's important for students to go in with their eyes open. There's been a lot of conversation about this, and certainly there's some places around the world where they're taking kind of action against gender studies. And I think I'm a very big supporter of academic freedom. I think everybody should be able to pursue whatever line of inquiry is of interest to them. But I do think that students should be warned, really, that gender studies is it's not just like any other discipline. It's not just plain old liberal arts. That it is about pushing a political ideology, advancing a very specific agenda, and that may not translate as well as others, your history majors and things like that, into the real world.
So, in the article, you mentioned that gender studies isn't fact-based. Could one argue that many classes in higher education aren't fact-based, like philosophy and English classes? Should we call these subjects into question as well?
Well, I think it's different. This isn't just English classes and philosophy classes. You're studying kind of a text and thinking through that and questioning it. Where in a lot of the gender studies programs, it looks like you're learning something more as dogma. The idea is not to think about how you react to something and kind of analyze the virtues or to question what a particular philosopher says. This is kind of to learn about this one set of beliefs, this one perspective, and then to try to put it into action. It's very one-sided. You aren't going to find great debates in these gender studies classes. It's just about kind of pushing one ideology on people.
But wouldn't one argue that couldn't a student with a different ideology from the other bring a different perspective that would promote analysis and begin a conversation?
Ideally, that would be great. If that was the case, if there was truly an open discussion, then that would make it a much better experience for students. But unfortunately, what you hear and what you read about as students describing their experiences, that's really considered out of bounds. Those debates are not welcome. Too often, I'm sure that there's some classes with some professors who are open to having those debates. But unfortunately, if you look at some of the stories, I highlight a couple of things I found. One woman writing in Quillette about being really told that her views weren't welcome, that it was making people uncomfortable, and basically that she should take that idea to hold back. And that made her question, what is it that she was doing? What was the purpose of this? If it wasn't, she described it as much more of a support group for people to share their experiences and how they felt the challenges of being a woman. But that certainly it wasn't a place where her views, more conservative views, were welcome.
So is that muting the academic freedom? Because I'm a political scientist, a political science major, and I can remember in undergrad, especially, that's where some of the greatest ideas and conversations where I began to kind of find my thought patterns and beliefs. And it was because I had an idea maybe from someone else in my classroom. So by muting those conversations, are we really, really giving students an opportunity to have that honest dialogue? And does that, and furthermore, does that go into why we see now that it's very hard to have balanced conversations with each other?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is, it's a disservice. I feel like sometimes when you have this conversation, it sounds like I'm just belly aching on behalf of conservatives. Oh, how terrible it is. The conservatives aren't comfortable in these classrooms. And there's an aspect of that. But the real tragedy of this is this loss of academic inquiry, of the exchange of ideas, of this idea that we can't kind of trust students to hear other views and to, consider them, reject them if they want, but to kind of go through that process. And I do think that's too often absent from women's studies. Actually, Independent Women's Forum is hosting an event coming up shortly in New York City that focuses on this and asks the question, why is it that sex differences have become an absolutely taboo subject on college campuses? You have very serious scholarship that goes on that look at the differences between how men and women's brains work, and there is a biological difference in how women and men's brains tend to function. This doesn't mean that women are worse than men. It doesn't mean that we're less capable than men. But these differences are often considered, hey, you can't talk about that. You have examples of people whose papers and their scholarship is literally erased because of blowback from it. I think that's it's insulting to women, it's insulting to men, and it's really the opposite of what we want to encourage on universities.
Well, Carrie, and I would agree with you on the conservative side that a lot of conservative leaders, in particular men, are not willing to change the style that conservatives outreach when they're talking to women, because if we believe in biological differences, then we should find different ways to communicate to reach female voters, and there is quantitatively a gender gap in the voting.
Oh, absolutely. This is, conservatives certainly need to know all they can about the differences and the different ways that men and women tend to approach issues. But this is something that this is not a partisan thing. It's not, I worry that sometimes we seem to see men and women as two sides competing. And if women are, if one side's better at something than the other, or that there's, that you can't even talk about it because it's too controversial. It shouldn't be like that. We should be able to have these conversations, recognize that everyone's equal. Nobody's talking about anything different or throwing that into question, but it really is important to understand how these differences manifest.
Sure. So, Carrie, real quick before we let you go, want to talk about the Harvard lawsuit. We'll put that headline up on screen so our viewers can check out the article. But Independent Women's Forum article saying Harvard due to respond to a lawsuit challenging the ban on single-sex clubs. And so Harvard is looking to ban sororities and fraternities. Here's my question. Harvard's a private college. Shouldn't they be allowed to do whatever they want? I mean, it's the 6% club. It's hard to get in there in the first place, which means you have to do a lot to get in, and it's a private university. Why can't the Harvard, faculty or management just decide who or what types of clubs to have?
Well, we'll see. This is the Harvard, like everybody, like all other universities, are subject to federal law. They receive a lot of federal aid. So there are expectations. They have to comply with federal law. And the thing that's interesting is Harvard has justified this as necessary for to protect women and to prevent patriarchal institutions. They've thrown out the idea that somehow this is supposed to help women defend themselves against sexual assault or reduce the prevalence of sexual assault. But then it's the women's clubs that are being hit the hardest. And it's these women's clubs that are often women's best support networks, give them the greatest opportunity for leadership. And this is really calling into question freedom of association. Harvard is talking about penalizing people for joining groups that aren't even aligned with the university. So this is saying for anybody who takes part in a single-sex organization, that could be a charity, a philanthropic organization that's outside of Harvard, you aren't even allowed to participate in that. It's really a question of what Harvard is trying to accomplish here and if it's really fair to their students.
All right. Well, thanks for highlighting it, Carrie Lukas. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Carrie.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Great.